Hello everyone, Luciano Oliveira. Today is January the 7th, Sunday, 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time. You are welcome to participate in our live stream. Today we're going to be addressing topics of interest to foreign citizens moving to retire in Brazil. This said, if you have a different question, if you have a question that is particular to your situation and you are a participant in our live stream, you may free to ask us to discuss any topics at all. It doesn't need to be connected to retirement in Brazil. Okay, so let's see if we have any questions so far. No questions that I can see. So let's move on to the first question regarding retirement that was received offline. What type of visa is required for retiring in Brazil and what are the steps to obtaining residency? All right, so there are different routes for people retiring in Brazil. There is, of course, the retirement visa, which makes sense if you are retired or in the process of retiring. The retirement visa, I would say the main downside is that you need to keep renewing this visa. It was conceived as a 2-year visa, so at the beginning it was thought you would need to renew every couple of years, but it's not uncommon for the Brazilian immigration to give you just a single year, potentially requiring you to renew this visa every year, which of course is a pain in the neck and a workaround, or I would say an even better alternative, as long, of course, as you have the funds for this purpose, you would be to acquire a qualifying real estate property in Brazil, which would give you right off the bat 4 years of stay. Sometimes they give you 2 years, but the most common timeline nowadays is 4 years. And after these 4 years, you would apply for the permanent residency in Brazil, which nowadays Brazilian immigration doesn't call permanent. It calls undetermined, in a sense that there is no specific expiration date. And basically, they just use this language because if something happens, for instance, if you sell the property, they would potentially void your residence in Brazil. But that's a much better route because, again, you would potentially get 4 years out of the bat. After that, permanent residency, so much better than retirement visa every couple of years, or even worse, every single year. All right, okay, we have a couple of questions already from the live participants. Brandy Jordan, can a CPLP resident permit be applied in Brazil for without getting a visa before, for instance, entering visa-free as a tourist? Almost every single immigration benefit can be obtained in Brazil without any visa, right? So visa-free, you are you're talking about the visa waiver. Brazil has a visa waiver for many countries, including the United States, Australia, and Canada. There is something new that just came up in a consultation I had like an hour ago with a really nice client of ours. Brazil has, for a second time, postponed, the requirement of visas for U.S. citizens, Canadians, and Australians. And the reason, most probably, it is, whenever they are getting close to enforcing visa requirements for U.S. citizens, guess what? U.S. citizens are going to not be pleased with the requirement, and they may take their U.S. dollars elsewhere. So Brazilian government has this idea of reciprocity. It's a major principle in Brazilian law. So the idea here is that for countries asking Brazilians to present a visa when entering the country, Brazil is going to do the same, right? Of course, this concept does not take into consideration important specifics such as there is a really large number of Brazilians who going to enter the U.S. as visitors and end up staying indefinitely in the country. So that would support the idea for the U.S. asking Brazilians to have a visa while U.S. citizens potentially would not be required to have a visa to enter Brazil. And that's what's happening. That was the policy of choice of the prior administration. President Bolsonaro was the president who said, you know what, reciprocity doesn't make sense for U.S. citizens. We want U.S. citizens, Canadians, and Australians to come into Brazil and spend their dollars, right? Either U.S. dollar, Canadian dollars, or Australian dollars, I guess. And this policy has been in place since President Bolsonaro. President Lula said he was going to get this policy out of the window, but it looks like it is easier said than done. And that's the second time the Brazilian government is postponing the requirement for visas. And the new date is going to be in April, okay? So it was on track to become enforceable on January the 10th. We're talking about Wednesday. And now this thing was postponed to April. All right? So, yes, Brandy, pretty much any benefit or residence permit can be applied in Brazil without getting any visas, as long as, of course, you are entering the country legally. Jackson Fox, welcome, Jackson. What are the new visa rules that take place in January 24th? That's probably what I was just talking about. The new visa rules was for foreign citizens to have an actual visa to enter Brazil, so the visa waiver would no longer be applicable, but Brazil, it looks like, is concerned that requiring visas is going to kind of, change the minds of U.S. citizens coming into Brazil. And therefore, it's not January the 24th any longer, it's April of 2024. And I wouldn't be surprised if in March, they either get rid of the idea of asking for visas, or, of course, we're talking about citizens from the U.S., Canada, and Australia. There are other countries with visa requirements in place, but we're just talking specifically about these three countries, okay? So no longer require the visa as January the 10th, as previously expected, but the new date is going to be in April only. Paolo Pini, can I buy a property without taking residence in Brazil? Yes, Paolo. In theory, right? In practical terms, it's not super advisable for you to buy stuff remotely, particularly when it involves a large sum of money, right? But in theory, you could buy property without setting a foot in Brazil through the use of power of attorney, currency exchange banks, and so on, right? The only major requirement you're going to need to meet is to get the Brazilian tax ID known as a CPF. You can get a CPF in a Brazilian consulate or embassy abroad. And once you have the Brazil tax ID, you could get a power of attorney for someone in Brazil to represent you in the different stages of acquiring property in Brazil. So there is no such requirement as a residence or not even an immigration status, right? Again, in theory, you could potentially buy a real estate property in Brazil without even setting foot in Brazil. Terry Roswell, hi Luciano, for the retirement visa and resolution 40. Our requirement is showing income of $2,000 a month. Must it be interest in transactions of $2,000 each month, right? So the way we show income is not actually income, but is actually retirement funds of $2,000 a month, okay? And it could be either like the preferred source is going to be, of course, Social Security. Social Security is traditionally a retirement type of income, but we've been able to approve applicants using a variety of incomes, right? Unemployment is not going to qualify because it goes against the retirement nature of the visa. But for instance, if you have annuities, okay, annuities is not social security income, but it would still be considered as a source of retirement funds. You could have a 401k, you could have a Roth IRA, you could have a traditional IRA, and you could even combine such incomes. Okay, Brazilian immigration is flexible in terms of you combining incomes as long as they are traditionally related to retirement. Another common question you're not asking, Terry Roosevelt, but people ask, how can I prove that I'm retired? Brazil has not so far asked for a proof of retirement and have applicants as young as 40 years old. For instance, retired military personnel from the U.S., if they retire early on because of some event, they would be absolutely fine to apply for the retirement visa. And so far, we haven't received proof of retirement per se. The idea is that people would have retirement funds to sustain themselves while you in Brazil. Must be in transactions of $2,000 each month. Again, they are not going to ask you to show that you are having transactions. Now, maybe the distinction you are asking about is if you need to show that you're spending the funds. So there are two moments in time, right? The first time when you are applying for the visa, you're not spending anything in Brazil because you don't have the visa yet. So you need to show the capability of supporting yourself. We're talking about the retirement account statements. We're not talking about actual transactions. However, down the road, let's say after you've been in Brazil for the first period of time, and then you need to renew the visa, you would, in theory, be required to show that you're sending the $2,000 a month to Brazil, and if you are actually spending or not, the $2,000 is not a requirement, but the Brazilian government could ask you to show that you're sending the $2,000 a month, because that's the whole purpose of granting the retirement visa, is for people to bring money to the country. Okay, Terry? Glaukin, thanks. Furthermore, is it possible? Is it Glaukin? Yes, sorry. Planning to have my third child in Brazil. Does the first two siblings who are not up to 18 years eligible to apply for Brazilian passport too immediately? So usually things are not immediately in Brazil. They have some time, for things to be processed. But I'm assuming that your two children are from a different nationality. They are not Brazilians, of course. So once you have a child in Brazil, you would actually qualify for residency, right? Just because you have a child in Brazil, you're not going to become automatically a Brazilian citizen. You could apply for residency. The residency itself, it takes several months for you to secure. After you secure the residency, you would have the possibility of applying for a citizenship under the so-called fast track. So for parents of a Brazilian child, as long as you stay 1 year interruptedly in Brazil, you could apply for citizenship. Now, your question is about your two other children. Usually Brazil is gonna give you like the family visa reunion or the residency reunion for relatives of someone with immigration benefits in Brazil. And the family reunion approach is that whoever it's with you would have comparable benefits, right? This would work, for instance, for the citizenship. So if you're getting a permanent residency in Brazil because if you are a father of a Brazilian child, potentially your children would also have a residency in Brazil for as long as you have a residency, okay? However, for the citizenship, I would assume that the citizenship requirement would be more restrictively interpreted, and you would be able to apply for the Brazilian nationality in 1 year, while your other children would need to wait for 4 years. Just because, of course, like citizenship is a much higher immigration benefit, and I don't think that they would make a parallel and say, listen, because the father has this right, we're going to extend the same right to your. My interpretation is that you would be able to apply in 1 year after securing the residency, but your children would need to wait for 4 years because they are not within the class of applicants to whom the fast track is made available. Paolo Pini has a follow-up question. Thanks. Furthermore, is it possible to buy property in Brazil through a real estate company, for example, European, costs compared to purchasing from a private individual? First thing, Paolo, I assume you're not interested in securing residency. If you are interested in securing residency, there is the real estate investment residency in Brazil. You buy a 1 million reais property in most of the country, as long as the property qualifies as a property suitable for the real estate investment visa, or so-called visa, but it's actually a residency. Buy a 1 million reais property in most of the country, or 700,000 reais in the north or northeast of the country, you're going to get a very important benefit. But if you buy through a company, of course, you're not going to get this benefit. But you could buy using a foreign entity, okay? Usually, it's going to increase the complexity of the transaction substantially. You cannot show up in Brazil with an European company and to basically buy a property right off the bat. The first thing you will need to do is to get a tax ID, right? You see there is a parallel. You as a person, if Paolo wants to buy property in Brazil, Paolo needs a tax ID. If Paolo's European LLC wants to buy a property in Brazil, this LLC must have a tax ID. This tax ID in Brazil for foreign citizens or for Brazilians alike is going to be the CPF, right? That's the individual tax ID. And for entities, there is a different type of tax ID, which is known as the CNPJ, right? The context is the same. the Brazilian authority doesn't want people to own real estate property without a tax ID. First, because they need to track real estate transactions. Second, because it comes with, of course, tax obligations. So it would make zero sense for anyone to buy real estate in Brazil before getting a tax ID. So going back to Paulo's scenario, the European company would need to apply for a tax ID, and it's not a simple application. You actually need to accomplish one of two things. First thing, you could have a registration with the Brazilian Central Bank, and this registration with the Brazilian Central Bank would output a Brazilian tax ID for the entity. This process is not like, not something that you would be able to accomplish with like most local accountants. You would probably need to secure a law firm specializing in cross-border transactions. That would be one of the two routes. The second route, it would be to go to a trade board. We call it a junta comercial. So it's a trade board at state level, and have your entity, let's say, legalized from a Brazilian entity formation perspective. So it's almost like your entity remains as a foreign entity, but you would have all the paperwork similar to what a local Brazilian entity would have. So both tracks, they do involve lots of steps, and it would increase the complexity of the transaction substantially. And of course, that would come with a cost. Okay, so yes, a cost would be substantially higher if you are using a foreign entity to acquire a real estate property in Brazil. All right, Terry Roswell. Is it possible to send 48,000 US dollars to Brazil, which is enough to cover the 2-year period of the retirement visa? So Terry, you could send as much money as you want to Brazil. Remember that for the retirement visa, the first thing, like when you're applying for the first time, they want to make sure that you have retirement funds. So they're not going to ask you for a proof of retirement per se, but they want to see retirement funds, because that's the nature of the visa. So just because you're sending 48,000 US dollars to Brazil, it doesn't mean you have the necessary funds. They need to see monthly income, or that you could have like this monthly $2,000 a month coming from retirement accounts, right? So to give you a very specific example, let's say if you have like an IRA account with $1 million, right, in this IRA, they need to see that you are capable of withdrawing $2,000 a month, right? Which sometimes is difficult, because particularly if it is like a stock-based IRA, you could have, like variable income, right? Like every month, like you would get, maybe if the results are positive, you're getting some money. If the stocks like lost value, then it's going to be negative. So ideally, for the Brazilian immigration, you would show that every month you are withdrawing $2,000 a month, right? So the IRA is basically, it's going to show like $2,000 being withdrawn for, let's say, 3 months in a row. And then you're going to present this paperwork to the immigration, and they are going to understand. They're going to see, all right, this applicant has $1 million in an IRA account, which is traditionally a retirement account. Now he's withdrawing $2,000 a month. Like, I can see that this meets the requirements, right? Now, just because you're sending 48,000 to Brazil, it doesn't mean that you are meeting the requirement. because just sending 48,000, we don't know where this money is coming from, right? Now, in terms of after you get the visa, maybe your question is, listen, instead of sending $2,000 a month to Brazil, which is a pain in the neck, particularly if you're sending through a bank, which is the ideal sending money to Brazil from an immigration perspective, right? You could very well send, like, first you got the visa, now you send 48,000 to Brazil, and 2 years down the road you say, well, listen, I sent the 48,000. I did meet the requirement of sending $2,000 a month, and therefore I'm good for the renewal. So if that's how you are planning, Terry, yes, that should be fine. Okay, you don't need to send 2,000 every month to meet the requirement. If you send a single installment of like $24,000 for the first year or 48 to cover 2 years, that would not be a problem. Randy Jordan, I see resident permits are temporary for 2 years and then can be converted to indefinite. Would an indefinite permit be granted even if during the temporary permit period I'm not living in Brazil? Brandy, yes, there is a requirement for a minimum time spent in Brazil. So if you're not living at all, that's not going to meet the requirement from the immigration. You would potentially your visa, and you would not get definite permit, right? Or the permanent residency, right? The current requirement is going to depend on the type of residency that you are using. For instance, for the real estate-based investment visa or for the real estate investment visa route, you must stay in Brazil for 14 days every couple of years. It doesn't need to be consecutive. So in theory, you could just fly to Brazil, spend a week per year, or you could just fly once every 2 years and spend a couple of weeks. That would be enough to get you through the temporary residency and allow you to apply for the permanent residency. Caleb, hi, I already have a resident permit through marriage and I have a CPF. Is this sufficient, or do I still need to get documents apostilled again in order to purchase real estate? Caleb, so you're doing your homework, you know the requirements to buy real estate in Brazil. One major document requirement for foreign citizens is going to be the birth certificate, because in Brazil, in order to identify someone, we believe we should know the person's parents' names, right? So if you are getting the residence permit, usually you're gonna get the birth certificate, apostille. That's the first step, right? Like for instance, if you were born in the U.S. in New York, you would get the apostille on your birth certificate. This birth certificate goes to Brazil, and then it's sworn translated. After that, the whole package is recorded in a specific registry called RTD, which is a registry in charge of recording documents and making those documents public and therefore valid for real estate transactions. And the only downside is that usually, the registry in charge of the real estate closing, they would want a birth certificate not older than 3 months, right? But if you are married, usually they are going to accept an older version of your birth certificate as long as you have a marriage certificate as well. And if the marriage was done in Brazil, the marriage certificate is going to be a Brazilian one, so you don't need to worry about the marriage certificate. And your birth certificate, even if older than 90 days, will most probably be accepted, okay? These requirements, they are set up on a state level. Each state is going to have a specific regulation addressing that. And even within the same state, different registries, they could have slightly different interpretations when it comes to the paperwork requirements. So a suggestion I have is like before you purchase agreement for a real estate transaction, you kind of check with the cartorios. Like you could basically send an email, you or your realtor could send an email, sharing exactly the documents that you have and ask them to confirm in writing, right, that you have all the documents that they are going to be asking for closing again before you sign the purchase agreement. Because unfortunately, some people they're going to come to us after they signed a purchase agreement, and of course after you sign a purchase agreement you cannot change the timeline for the transaction. You cannot change the terms of the deal. So ideally you try to do this due diligence on paperwork before signing the purchase agreement. Terry Roosevelt, thanks Luciano, as usual, very informative and thorough response. Thanks again. Thank you, Terry, for participating. Without people like you, our live streams, they would not make much sense. We are here to share the knowledge, so your questions are always helpful, not only for you, but for other people as well. Jackson Fox, what is the property cost requirements, value of the property needed to receive citizenship, looking to purchase in Salvador. Salvador is a super hot market with foreign citizens. We have several transactions completed in Salvador. We have a couple of ongoing transactions as we speak in Salvador. And as of today, the requirement is 700,000 reais, which is roughly 130, 140,000 US dollars, right? Jackson, an important point to keep in mind is that this amount has been the same since 2018. So we're talking about almost like 6 months, 6 years ago. And I think it's just natural that eventually the government is going to raise the required amount. But again, as we speak, the required amount is exactly 700,000 reais. Maybe just expand a little bit on the property requirements. The amount is not the only requirement. You must buy a property that has legal title, okay? In Portuguese, we call Registro Geral do Imóvel. And in Salvador, particularly when you're buying, like properties for 1 million reais and above, these properties, they are going to have the required paperwork. But what is surprising is that we have some issues with the video. I'm not sure what's going on. Let me check here if it's something we can fix on the spot. All right, looks like video is back. Okay, so let me tell you about some other requirements. I was just talking about the legal title. Surprised that in Florianopolis, for instance, many properties do not have the legal title. They are sold on a possession base only, like they don't have a deed, and therefore if you buy a property with no deed, then you cannot secure the legal residency, okay? It looks like we're still having some glitches with the video. Hopefully this is gonna go away. Right, it looks like stable again. Let me tell you about another requirement. You gotta buy a property that is urban, okay? So if you're planning to buy rural property is not gonna qualify. It's like urban property in Bahia. rural property in Bahia, even if it's closer to Salvador, this property is not going to qualify. So you got to be urban, otherwise, no luck. Another is for uh, paying the amount, right? The amount got to be recorded in the closing papers. If you are buying a property, let's say for 700,000 reais, and in the contract, in the closing papers, it is being said that a certain amount of that money is to cover like furniture. Guess what? You're not really buying a 700,000 reais property, so that's another problem we see sometimes happening. One more problem when buying properties to secure the residency is when you send the money in an incorrect way. Some people, they are gonna, be able to open an investment account, a limited kind of account in Brazil, and then they want to send the money to this bank account. And once they have enough money, they are going to buy the property. And if you do that, you are risking a denial to your application, because the way the immigration sees it, or even the government sees it, is that you should send the money directly to the seller. And there was a couple of exchanges in terms of this question in one of our videos, and the person was asking, really smart questions, right? Like, why do I need to do that, right? Because it's not safe, of course. Like, if you send the money directly from abroad, you are unable to time the release of the money, and therefore you are risking paying the seller in full without getting the matching title. But the short answer is that that's how the government thinks that it would be easier for them to track the money coming from abroad for the purchase of real estate. And banks, when they recorded the transaction with the Brazilian Central Bank, right, like when you send the money from abroad to Brazil, the bank in Brazil is going to record under a certain track. There is a specific code for every type of transaction. So if you send the money to your own account, the money is going to be recorded as availability, which makes sense because it's going to be sent by you or from you to yourself, and you're not sending from you to the seller. So the bank is not going to be able to say that this is money for a real estate transaction. They are going to say this is money transferred under the availability coding. And when you send the money directly to the seller is presenting the paperwork to release the money. It's very easy for the bank to see that this is a real estate transaction, and therefore, when they issue the currency exchange paperwork, is going to show that this is a real estate transaction currency exchange. Okay, so this is to highlight. That in addition, Jackson, to the money requirement, there is a bunch of other requirements. And I always say that is amusing. It's actually shocking to me that people are just gonna go out there and buy the property and later on to try to apply for. See, you should have like your attorney involved from the beginning of the process to make sure that you're buying a property and doing in the correct way, so you're going to get the residency later on. Residency in Brazil, particularly the permanent one, is a super big deal. For instance, you're never going to secure, and that's a surprise to some people, you're never going to secure permanent residency in Brazil or citizenship through a retirement visa. You're not going to achieve that through a digital nomad visa, but you do achieve that through a real estate investment visa. So it's a super big deal, and you got to do it right the first time. Caleb, do you work with properties across Brazil or only a center area? Yes, we work with properties across Brazil. We have, partner registries in all of these main areas for instance, Salvador, Fortaleza, Florianópolis, São Paulo, and Rio de Janeiro. We have physical offices in those two cities. So we actually attended the closings with our in those two cities. In other cities, we are able to review the entire closing papers before you show up for the closing. So we make sure that everything is straight before getting to that stage. We assist with the money remittance, so it's done the right way. But yes, we work across Brazil, have had transactions in every single state already. Randy Jordan, thank you. What rules apply to keeping permanent residency? Brandy, the rules are pretty straightforward. Like if you're buying a real estate, there is a specific clause in the last resolução normativa, which is the regulation supporting the residency through real estate, saying that for as long as you want to keep the benefit, you should keep the property, right? So I know it's common and it is interesting to share that some people, once they achieve the permanent residency to real estate, they are going to run and sell the property, okay? The case is that nobody is going to ask you again for the paperwork, but it could also be the case that you're gonna have to renew your card. Let's say if you lose your card and if you need to ask for a replacement card. If you sold the property and the immigration analyst, right, if they say, listen, because this is a benefit supported by real estate, I want to see a fresh copy of the title. And if at that moment in time you sold the property, guess what? You're not going to be able to fulfill this requirement from the immigration analyst, and you're going to be out of luck, okay? In terms of staying in the country, once you achieve the permanent residency, our interpretation is that there is no longer a need for you to be a certain number of days in the country, okay? However, if you're going to apply for citizenship, then yes, of course, there's going to be how much time you need to stay in the country to be able to apply for a citizenship. Paulo Pini, thanks again, very clear. In addition, is there a property tax? If so, what percentage are we talking about? Yes, there is a number of taxes related to properties. The two main ones by far are going to be the property transfer tax, right, which is the one you're going to pay when you're buying property in Brazil. They could range from 2 to 4%, most probably 2 or 3% or something in between, okay, 2%, 2.5%, 3%. Some states, they have like brackets. Other states, they have a single number. And you also, and first is that like how the state structures how the property transfer tax is charged. And this could also change depending on the municipality as well. Okay, so that's the main one. And then there is the yearly tax that you're going to pay. The name for this tax is the IPTU, and it means like a tax over urban property. Okay, that's the name of the tax. Usually, it's going to increase according to how much the property is valued. And it could be something between 0.5% and 1% of the property value. Okay, that's a common range between 0.5% and 1%. Because we're talking about Salvador, like a connection to Jackson's question. In Salvador, it's super common for an additional tax to exist, which is like the taxa de aforamento. Other people, they call it laudêmio. Laudemio is actually a tax you're going to pay for the first time only when you buy it. But every year you're going to have the taxa de aforamento. And taxa de aforamento is like a payment you're going to make to the federal government. Federal government is a co-owner of land, beachfront land, right? So if you're buying property that has an amazing view, that could come at an additional cost, which would be the taxa de aforamento, which is additional. And that's why I said there are a few taxes and not just a couple of taxes. So that would be additional to the traditional annual property tax, right? And you're paying because of the co-ownership with the federal government. Also talking about Salvador, Salvador has, this possibility of mosteiros, which are religious entities that sometimes they, were granted, I don't know, 200, 300 years ago, they were granted a large tract of area by the beach, so they would also receive the same nature of taxa de aforamento because someone built a building, an apartment building on their land, and now every year you need to pay these religious entities some type of money. So, like for the last transaction we completed in Salvador, there was the buyer, he's from California, he's going to be paying the annual property tax, he's going to be paying the taxa de aforamento to the federal government, taxa de aforamento to the religious entity in Salvador, which is a mosteiro, okay? Glaukin, thank you very much. Please, what are the benefits for foreign students in Brazil? So, foreign students, you're gonna get the student visa is one of the main visas in Brazil for foreign citizens. The foreign student visa, it doesn't get you much in terms of benefits. It's not gonna, of course, convert into permanent residency. It's not gonna give you an opportunity citizenship down the road. But the upside of the student visa is that in theory, it's going to be there for as long as you study, right? So I have a friend of mine, he's from California. We met roughly in 2012, in 2012. And he only last year or the year before, he secured the permanent residency through real estate. But for the vast majority of 10 years, he was in Brazil under a student visa, okay? Just because he could stay in Brazil for as long as he needed until he would have the funds to buy real estate, and he could stay in Brazil under the student visa. I apologize, our video link is acting up. I'm not sure if it is something related to YouTube or our, resources, but, most of the time I see that the image is showing. I appreciate your patience on that. Okay, D Hustler 15, not necessarily related, but any idea on why the date for visa was pushed back for US, Canada, and Australia? The Hustler, the idea is that, like if you make it complicated, it's guaranteed that a number of citizens are not going to be traveling to Brazil anymore. And I'm sure the Brazilian government is tracking the, like how many people are coming to Brazil. And maybe just because of news of a visa requirement, US citizens, Canadians, and Australians started to pick other places to go. And Brazil real quick realized maybe, the enforcement of the reciprocity principle is not a smart idea. and they are, maybe they don't want to say, you know what, like we're not going to ask anymore. President Bolsonaro was right. I mean, they don't want to lose face. So, in Portuguese, we call it empurrar com a barriga, okay, which means you're going to push something with your belly, all right? That's something very Brazilian to say. But they don't want to say that they messed up or they promised it to do something that they are not going to do it. So they're just, postponing these requirements. I would say if they go by, rationality, they would probably get rid of this idea and forget about enforcing visa, for US, Canada, and Australia citizens. But that would be my take. I mean, they are just concerned that they are hurting the economy, right? They are shooting themselves in the foot, right? If that makes sense, okay. That would be my take. I mean, it's not a smart idea, and to tell you the truth, even from the reciprocity perspective, I don't think it makes sense, right? Like, I mean, if you're gonna be working under the reciprocity principle, things should be the same for you to compare. And they're not the same, right? Like, I mean, the US asks Brazilians for a reason, right? If you don't ask Brazilians for a visa, maybe you would see like 1 million people per year moving into the US. And of course, like that would not be feasible for the United States or for Canada and Australia, and therefore they must ask Brazilians for a visa. Okay, and there is no such parallel when you think about Australia and Canada is a completely different situation. Who are going to usually abide by the laws. They are not going to, travel into Brazil saying that they are traveling for staying indefinitely, which is what happens to lots and lots of Brazilians who, go to the U.S. saying they're going to visit and they just stay in the U.S., right? So even from the reciprocity perspective, I don't think the policy makes a lot of sense, but that's just my 2 cents on the reason why they are postponing for the second time and potentially postponing again down the road or even getting rid of this bad idea, in my opinion. Okay. All right. Caleb, thank you, Luciano. Much appreciated. I will need a lawyer, so hopefully you are available and I'm looking to buy. Do you think it's buy after getting citizenship? I may be eligible soon. Of course, Caleb, it would be a pleasure to assist you. We have a whole team in our real estate department. I do participate in most of our transactions. Personally, I participate in the Zoom calls. I assist with the review of the key documents, and we also have other amazing team members. We have Patrick, we have Paulo, we have Victoria, we have other people who are giving their best to make your transaction safe and to get what you're paying for. It's much easier to buy after getting citizenship. I would say as long as you have the paperwork that you use it to secure your residency. If I'm not mistaken, Caleb, in your case, it was true of a marriage, right? You applied for a permanent residency through a marriage. I think you already did like the most, time-consuming work in terms of securing paperwork. So my answer to you is that no, I don't think it's going to become a much easier. Real estate transactions in Brazil, they usually require a high degree of attention because, as you probably know, there are no escrow accounts in Brazil, right? So that's pretty concerning to many foreign citizens. It means the sellers are going to get your money in their pocket before they are going to sign the deed of sale, right? Pretty concerning by itself. Second point of concern, particularly for U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens, when they are buying properties in the U.S., you can get title insurance. What is title insurance? Like if you buy a bad title property, you bought a property from John, but actually the property is owned by Andrew, right? And you got the title insurance. Guess what? Someone is going to reimburse you for every single dollar that you paid for the property. In Brazil, we don't have such type of insurance, which means that if you buy a bad title property, you are on your own. And as I like to say, good luck suing the seller, right? Like in Brazil, naturally, money, it does not come as I don't want to say easy. I don't think money is easy for any. It's much harder for people to get money in Brazil. So once sellers get your money in their pockets, usually they have a destination for this money. Maybe they are going to buy another property. Maybe they're paying for their debts. And, even if they have assets that you could go after, lawsuits in Brazil usually take a long, long time. We have a few lawsuits here at the firm representing that just for the service to be completed is taking more than a year, right? So I'm talking about the citation for the paperwork to be served on the defendant is taking over a year, right? So unfortunately, lawsuits are not something we usually recommend our clients. But I mean, if you lose your money, if you buy a property from someone, and then later on a third party comes, after the property, the thing is, I mean, there is little recourse for you as the buyer other than suing the seller. And a lawsuit could last for over a decade. And no lawyers at all in Brazil are going to work under a contingency basis only approach. So that's why I think it is extremely important for foreign citizens when they are buying real estate property to have the supervision or the participation of an attorney. And it doesn't need to be us, right? I mean, any reputable lawyer, you go to Google, see the types of reviews that the law firm or the lawyer has, and then you pay for the service. I think it's a really well spent money, and I cannot imagine someone coming to Brazil without being a local and just buying without legal representation. But when that happens, unfortunately, sometimes people don't get what they're paying for. We have lawsuits here at the firm representing such clients, but I really try to dissuade the buyer, saying, listen, spending probably another, I don't know, a share of the property you bought, you're going to be spending, and there is no guarantee that we're going to be able to get assets from the defendant. So as usual, right? Like better for you to avoid to be in the place, to be in that situation in the first place, because once you are, nobody can guarantee that you're going to see your money back. All right. So that's another perspective to our answer. All right. We are approaching our 1 hour limit. I'm going to take a last question here. Is going to be a question from Jackson Fox. Now, if you have more questions, remember, we're going to be here Wednesday. Okay, we're going to be here on Wednesday, January the 10th. And the time is going to be at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. All right. So on Sundays we meet at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time, but on Wednesdays we meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. So got a question? Maybe you're thinking about what we discussed today, and then a new question shows up. Join us on Wednesday at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. All right. Okay, so let's go to our final question. Jackson Fox, for citizenship by property purchase, can it be new construction And does he have to be a primary residence or can it be an Airbnb? Let me start with the second question, second part of your question first, because it's going to be easier to answer. The Brazilian immigration doesn't care what you're going to do with the property as long as you keep this property and you are the owner of record. Okay, if you have the legal title, if you have the legal title for the property. So yes, you could do Airbnb, and we have clients who buy the property, they do Airbnb, and they travel throughout Brazil, and that's absolutely fine. Now, regarding the first question, new construction is usually acceptable as long as you're buying from a major developer. And the reason for this note about a major development is that you're going to need to present a bunch of paperwork, right? Like if you're buying an existing property, you're basically presenting the legal title, the legal deed, you're presenting the currency exchange contract showing that you sent your money for the purchase of real estate. You're going to be showing the contract, so the immigration analyst is going to make sure that this was a clean transaction and so on. But when you're buying a new property, a new construction, right, or an off-plan property, which means there is no property yet, right? You're just buying something out of a plan. It changes the paperwork that you're going to present. And the paperwork you're going to present are going to be, among others, you're going to need to record the purchase agreement in a registry, which is not super usual by Brazilian standards. That's one of the requirements. You're going to need to show that you sent the entire payment, right? So if you're buying a property for 1 million reais and you just paid 100,000, you cannot tell the immigration analyst, well, I paid just 100 because the construction is not ready and I'm going to be paying, 20,000 reais per month. And I still want my residence, right? They're going to say, well, not yet. Once you paid the entire amount, then yes, come back and we're going to work this out with you. Okay, so that's another requirement, that you paid the full amount. There is a third requirement, which is like the licenses for the construction, which is actually pretty easy to be obtained. Now, the fourth requirement is like the incorporation paperwork, which is super difficult to get. So if you're working with a small developer, my concern is that maybe the small developer is cutting corners and the small developer does not have the incorporation paperwork necessary for the immigration to approve your application. Now, if you're buying in a market like Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, and Belo Horizonte, for instance, I would not have much concern, because usually those markets, the regulators are pretty on top of the developers. And if you're buying like an apartment from a large development, I would guess a 95% chance that they're going to have the paperwork required for you to secure the residency, okay? Now, if you're buying in a small building development, maybe the developer does not have the proper paperwork. Another type of concern is like in Florianopolis, for instance, is a market where there is a lot of possession-only sales, right? Even for off-plan properties, which is crazy for someone from São Paulo or Rio de Janeiro, but it's a reality in Florianopolis. They sell a new development under a possession-only basis because it's customary in that market. And those properties, even if they have the papers, maybe you're not gonna get the residency because the underlying title for the building is not gonna be there. Okay, so that's another concern as well. Well, I hope that was helpful. Thank you everyone for participating, for such interesting questions. Again, if you have another question or another topic of your interest, make sure to participate on Wednesday at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. Thank you for coming. It was a pleasure speaking with all of you, and have a blessed rest of your Sunday.